Welcome to the Global Diplomacy Leadership Podcast. During the first season, we will talking about diplomacy and its different classification as well as international affairs. My name is Sofia Morales, and we welcome the President of Global Diplomacy Leadership, Dr. Denisse Morales.
Thank you so much, Sofia. It is great to be here, and thanks to our audience for joining us.
We are happy to have you here and thank you for sharing with us your knowledge and experience on international affairs and diplomacy. On this episode, we are going to talk about parliamentary diplomacy. Let's share a little introduction of parliamentary diplomacy with our audience.
Yes, I am happy to share this information with our diplomats and members of parliaments. By way of introduction, parliamentary diplomacy arises from the increasing globalization and actors in the field of international relations. Thus, diplomacy has been enriched by new types of diplomacy. This new type of diplomacy aims to bring together interests by creating new alliances in order to take advantage of the opportunities of globalization.
Continue the ideas. The role of parliamentary diplomacy as an important part of international cooperation by supporting political dialogue and mediation. Parliamentary diplomacy plays a role in conflict prevention and crisis management, and contributes to finding solutions to political challenges at the international, regional, and national level. It helps to strengthen dialogues between countries and increase mutual understanding. Parliamentary diplomacy can be conducted through bilateral relations between parliaments or through multilateral, international, and regional organizations and channels. Engagement between members of parliament from different countries open new channels for dialogues and offer a degree of flexibility when addressing complex issues. Members of parliaments are often included in official delegations during state visits and international events, which can offer opportunities for parliamentary diplomacy. Parliaments regularly organize incoming and outgoing visits with other parliaments. There are also more formal arrangements, such as parliamentary friendships groups, that involves regular exchange of views between members of parliaments from different countries. Can you share with us the different meaning of parliamentary diplomacy?
Of course, let's talk about the different meanings about parliamentary diplomacy. One of the main definition of parliamentary diplomacy is that is the diplomacy developed by the legislative branch. Another meaning is the institutional structure to link the legislative chambers and their members. Another one is that the parliaments have this function parallel and complementary to the diplomacy of the states represented by the executive branch. Another one is the expression of bilateral relations between parliaments. One definition that it caught my attention is the regular international activity that parliaments carry out in order to achieve specific public objectives. One definition that is important is the intervention or participation of the legislative branch in its organs in the definition, control, and execution of the state's foreign policy. Another meaning is the effective means of promoting cooperation between the different parliaments of the states. And finally, we have this broad definition of diplomacy that is developed between the legislative powers of different nations.
Can you give us a definition of parliamentary diplomacy?
Yes, broadly speaking, parliamentary diplomacy is the role of parliaments, assemblies, and congresses with their own rules and protocols for reciprocal action in the defense of national interest as well as cooperation with other nations to address global challenges primarily. Now, let's move on to the objectives of parliamentary diplomacy, which are promoting the creation of bonds at the international level, defending national interest, defending democratic values, homologation of national laws. Thus, parliamentary diplomacy strives to establish links between all states' parliaments in order to exchange legislative information on issues of fundamental interest. The Foreign Affairs Committees of each parliament is the way in which this approachment between parliaments takes place. The characteristics of parliamentary diplomacy includes the presence of a permanent international organization, considerable diffusion and impact of its debates, resolutions adopted by consensus or majority vote, immediate publication of resolutions.
How is parliament diplomacy conducted?
The form in which parliamentary diplomacy is conducted is in meetings of delegations, either sporadically or permanently, the creation of friendship groups, the activity of the presidents of the chambers, by national meetings of deputies and senators, the participation of delegations in regional parliaments, in international forums such as the United Nations, in regional forums, in thematic forums, and finally, parliamentary diplomacy can also take place between parliaments, governments, political organizations at business, social, and other levels. Now, let me talk about principles. The fundamental principles of legislative diplomacy are mutual and equitable cooperation, respect for the sovereignty of states, a coordinated strategy between the executive and legislative um, on foreign policy is required to achieve the goals of parliamentary diplomacy, as the legislature involvement goes beyond diplomatic appointments and the ratification of international treaties. Now, let's talk about the benefits of this type of diplomacy that includes a greater plurality of representation, less formalism. It goes where classical diplomacy sometimes cannot go. It complements classical diplomacy. It makes international relations more dynamic. And it guarantees respect for democratic principles. Parliamentary diplomacy can act as observers in electoral processes, in peace processes, in international forums. And finally, I would like to talk about the stages of parliamentary diplomacy. The stages of parliamentary diplomacy are the legislative cooperation, the internationalization of regionally and internationally agreed norms, and the adoption of these agreements, treaties, conventions by the executive with ratification by the legislature.
Following as example of parliamentary diplomacy, activities of multilateral international parliamentary organizations, bilateral parliamentary groups, and in particular so-called friendships groups, international agreements between parliaments, the activities of Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee, plenary sessions dealing with foreign policy questions, parliamentary participation in elections monitoring process, also deal with related issues such as the importance of protocol, the rule of language, and the difference between bicameral and unicameral parliamentary systems. And don't forget, distinguish between three kinds of parliamentary cooperation at the international level: parliamentary diplomacy, interparliamentary cooperation, and technical parliamentary cooperation. Thus, parliamentary diplomacy is more than just parliamentary cooperation, partly because it is more institutionalized than parliamentary cooperation. Parliamentarians are quite aware of the many possibilities that parliamentary diplomacy does and can offer. For instance, a small number of practitioners have been addressing this question not only in conference as well on the website but also in publications. Can you share with us the international and regional parliaments' point of view?
Absolutely. The following is a brief overview of the types of world and regional parliaments that exist. The first one is the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Created in 1889, its original purpose was to promote peace through diplomacy and parliamentary dialogue. It currently has 180 member countries and also focuses on promoting democracy, equality, human rights, and development. Countries such as China, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Federation are members of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Its aim was also to contribute to global governance. The second is the European Parliament. The European Parliament is a political forum. It shapes and decides new legislation, and it's responsible for scrutinizing the EU institutions and promoting human rights inside and outside the European Union. The European Parliament was being instrumental in amending the European treaties and has contributed to European integration. The third one is the African Parliament. The African Parliamentary Union is a continental interparliamentary organization established in Abidjan on 13 February 1976. Its objectives include promoting unity of action among the parliamentary institutions of all African states, while contributing to the promotion of peace, democracy, interparliamentary cooperation, and parliamentary diplomacy, as well as the promotion of human rights. 41 national parliaments are members of the African Parliament Union. In addition, the African Parliamentary Union, in collaboration with the Arab Inter-Parliamentary, organizes every 2 years the Afro-Arab Parliamentary Conference Union, the last of which took place in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, in May 2016. And finally, we have this Latin American and Caribbean Parliament. The Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, Parlatino, is composed of 23 countries. It is a deliberative assembly, temporary in nature, gives non-binding recommendations, and its objectives are the defense of democracy, the integration of Latin America, non-intervention, self-determination of peoples, legal equality of states, territorial integrity of states, peaceful and negotiated international disputes.
I would like to complement that almost all the parliaments have foreign affairs committee with a broad oversight mandate. In some countries, the executive is required to consult with the committee before important decisions are taken on foreign policy issues. International agreements on issues such as environmental policy, trade, and security have a direct impact on the public and affect the rights and obligations of all. It is therefore important that such agreements are subject to transparent decision-making process at the national level. At the end, the parliamentary committees should have an active role in scrutinizing agreements with international financial institutions. So now let's talk about the foreign affairs and international agreements in based on global comparative analysis. The Parliament is legally responsible for the ratification of international agreements that include significant national obligations. The Executive is required to report to Parliament on the implementation of international agreements. Finally, can you share with us a brief conclusion about parliamentary diplomacy?
Yes, in conclusion, I can say that parliamentary diplomacy is a new deal between nations. It's a new deal, and it can be a support to governmental diplomacy. It is a sui generis diplomacy, and also it's an emerging function of major importance. Parliamentary diplomacy goes beyond the constitutional powers of the legislature in foreign policy matters, such as authorizing treaties, for example. It shows a clear influence of parliaments on the development of the state's international relations, reflects regional integration. Parliamentary diplomacy plays the role of legislator, but also of diplomat. And finally, parliamentary diplomacy is the interaction between the direct representatives of countries' populations.
The evidence for assessment of this dimension could include the following provisions of the Constitution establishing Parliament's role in determining and overseeing foreign policy priorities and the ratifying international agreements, provisions of international treaties, conventions, or agreements mandating regular reporting by the executive to Parliament. The terms of reference of parliamentary committees indicating their role in overseeing foreign affairs policy. Committee reports on foreign affairs issues and research briefing and informational material on foreign affairs produced by parliamentary research service or other bodies of the parliamentary secretariat. Thank you so much, Denise, for joining us on this episode.
Thanks to you, Sofia. And we would like to thank the audience for joining us today. And we remind all diplomats around the world that we are open to meet your parliaments and talk about parliamentary diplomacy. For more information, please send us an email. Thank you so much.